Hello guys, today I'll show you how to make and set up AprilTag Trackers. First of all, let's go over the requirements. The most important thing you'll need is a decent camera. This can be anything from a PS3 Eye camera to a mobile phone, as long as you can get it recognized as a webcam in Windows. If you're going to use a PS3 Eye camera, there's a link to a driver in the description. What you look for when choosing your camera is mostly the FPS. Resolution does also matter, but it's not as important as FPS, since you can just make the markers bigger if your camera is having issues detecting them further away. I'll be using a PS3 Eye camera for this tutorial. Next up, you'll need a printer, or a print shop in your area, as well as some cardboard and glue. Preferably hot glue, as it's more sturdy. You'll also need some rubber bands and some sort of metal wire, like you can find in a notebook for example. And that's it for the requirements. Most of you should have everything at home. If not, these materials shouldn't be too costly. Now, let's start off with how to actually build these trackers. It's pretty simple. Cut out two markers as one strip and lay them on the cardboard. Draw a box around the paper and cut it. Then fold it in the middle. Once you're done with that, cut two right-angled triangles. The size shouldn't be too big, so you have enough room for your leg. Then, if you've cut out all the pieces, plug in your hot glue gun, or use regular glue, up to you. Push the cardboard strip into a right angle and put the triangle onto the bottom half of the cardboard. Then attach it with hot glue. Once the hot glue turns solid, fold up the other half of the cardboard and attach it with hot glue again. Attach the other triangle with hot glue as well, and repeat this with the other trackers. By the end, you should have 6 trackers. Now all that's left is gluing the markers onto the trackers. I recommend labeling them as Tracker 1 front and back, Tracker 2 front and back, and hip front and back. Once you're done with making the trackers, we can move on to the next step. Go to the AprilTag GitHub page, link in the description, and download the latest version. Version 0.7 at the time of recording this. Now open the file AprilTagTrackers.exe. Next, go to the Params tab up here. I'll be going over all the settings first before we get started. If you encounter any issues while calibrating later, you'll have to change some of these settings and try around until you find something that works for you. Let's start with the camera parameters. Here you'll have to enter the IP address of your camera if you're using an IP camera like your phone, or the ID of your camera if you're using a regular camera. This is usually 0, although it can be a different number. You'll have to try and find out for yourself. Now, if you're using a PS3 Eye camera like me, you'll have to enter 9100 into the camera API preference. If your camera is rotated, select the according rotation here. In my case, I had to enable the mirror camera option. I am unsure if everyone using a PS3 Eye camera will have to use it. Just enable it if you see your camera being mirrored in the camera preview. Now, it's important to set the correct FPS amount. Technically, you can enter a really high number like 999 and it will just go for the highest FPS, but I like to enter the actual FPS value just to prevent any issues. Check this if you use a regular webcam to open the camera settings window on Camera Start to adjust your settings. This won't work with the PS3 Eye camera, so I'll leave it disabled. The lighting part is one of the most important settings. These will differ for every room and camera setup, but I use the following values. If you're completely lost, try my settings first, and then just play around with them until you find something that works. These settings took me a bit to find, so don't worry if it takes you a few minutes of changing values until it works right. Now the tracker parameters. The amount of trackers should usually be 3, unless you made extra trackers for your knees, elbows, chest, etc. The size of the markers is around 5 cm if you've printed it using A4 paper. However, if you have a lower resolution camera and you printed bigger trackers, you'll have to change this value accordingly. For me, it worked best to just leave quad decimate on 1, but feel free to try out different settings to see what works best for your setup. The search window works best on 0.4 for me. As with most settings, this can be different for your setup. As the hint already says here, only change this if you know what you're doing. We're using the standard AprilTag markers, so just keep it on standard. This option doesn't really matter, since games with full body tracking support expect the trackers to be outside of your body and not inside, so leaving this disabled shouldn't be causing any issues. If you're using OA-Track or a real Vive tracker for your hip, check Ignore Tracker 0. I'll be using a regular AprilTag tracker for my hip, so I'll leave this disabled. Next up are the smoothing parameters. These settings work best for me, but can differ for your setup. Alright, we're done with the Parameters tab. Click Save in the bottom left, and then go back to the Camera tab. Open the camera preview window and press Start Stop Camera. If you entered the correct camera ID, it should show up properly in the preview. Next, you'll have to calibrate the camera. Open the Chiruko board file in the Images to Print folder and move your camera around until the calibration window is filled with purple dots and the grid is mostly static. Make sure the image is opened on a flat monitor and not a curved one. If you do not have a flat monitor, print out the Chiruko board on an A4 paper. Once done with that, put on your trackers. Now click on Calibrate Trackers. Get close to your camera or move the camera close to your trackers until all the markers are green. The hip one can be difficult to calibrate depending on how you wear it. Before we move on to the next step, make sure to install the SteamVR drivers. You can find the installation file in the driver files folder. Alternatively, you can copy and paste the AprilTag Trackers folder into the SteamVR driver folder. You can find it by going on Steam, then right-clicking on SteamVR, Manage, Browse Local Files, and then going into the drivers folder. Now you can start up your headset and SteamVR. Once you got SteamVR running, make sure the plugin isn't blocked by your settings. If it's running, you can now click on Connect to SteamVR and then on Start Stop. Feel free to open the output preview. You should now be seeing a little white camera in your play space along with 3 Vive trackers. Don't worry if they're far away from you, this is normal. Now we'll have to calibrate the trackers. Enable calibration mode. Use your left controller's trigger to move the camera. Move it approximately to where your camera is IRL. Once it's in the right spot, press the grip button to rotate it. Adjust the scale by moving forward and backwards until your virtual trackers line up with your real trackers. After you're done, disable calibration mode again. And that was it. You can now hop into VRChat and try out your new full body tracking. Next time when you're starting AprilTag Trackers, you will only have to start the camera and connect to SteamVR. However, if your front and back trackers aren't roughly in the same spot as they were last time, you will have to recalibrate your trackers. After setting it up, you can still play around with the settings if you're feeling that something isn't quite right. Maybe your trackers are too slow or you lose tracking often, even while just doing slow movements. That was it, the tutorial. If you have any questions that haven't been answered in this video, feel free to ask in the comments down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe if you don't want to miss out on future videos. Bye bye.